All right, good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to be with all of you. We're going to get things kicked off now because I know we've got a tremendous amount to cover. We got 2 hours of material that we condensed down into about an hour. It gives me tremendous pleasure to welcome the first speaker in our Chanuka lecture series, a guy named Nachliel Selavan, who I've been kind of following on Facebook and seeing some of the awesome stuff that he puts out there and kind of relates to Jewish thought and history from all these really interesting ways and angles. And so I thought we got to get this guy on and here we are, which is really fantastic. But also, I don't know if you know where we know each other from. Nachliel, do you know where I know you from?
I was gonna guess from Yeshivat HaKotel, but I can't remember.
No. I would be very impressed if you did. But I used to daven. My cousins lived in the old city of Yerushalayim. They've since moved out to Rehavia. But I used to daven at
Or Chaim?
Or Chaim,
Wow, that's a
knew your
long time
father,
ago.
you, and we were both a lot younger at that point. And so I remember both of us as young men, and your father, of course, also, wonderful historian and tour guide, and doing really interesting things. So small world, amazing connections. Without further ado, I'm gonna unspotlight myself and put the spotlight just on Nachliel. I just want to mention to everybody, if you could please, if you have questions, so you can just put them in the chat box, and there will be some times in which you could, you'll certainly be able to speak. But in the meantime, if you could just stay muted throughout the presentation, that would be fantastic until we have an opportunity to speak. So thanks, everyone. Nachliel, over to you.
All right, taking it away. Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. Good evening, and welcome to the kickoff of the first of a series of not only programs for the community at Blake Street in Melbourne, but also in general. This is the first virtual tour that I'm doing on the topic. I'm usually in the museum running around doing these 2-hour tours, 3 of them a day back to back at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. But here we are in Israel and you're in Australia. And I think that this is an excellent opportunity to visit more than one location and more than one museum to explore this fascinating subject. Just a technical note, I'm gonna be sharing my screen, but there was also a PDF of sources that was sent around by Rabbi Sender earlier. Those sources, if you're missing them, if you don't have them, just contact him privately. And that is the sources I'm going to be referring to. However, I'm focused more on the experiential and not so much on the text. The texts are there as an anchor to know what I'm talking about. And I'm going to refer to them, paraphrase them, sometimes read from them, but they're very light. So if you don't have them and the technical difficulty of getting them now, attaining them now is not so possible, it's nothing to worry about. You will be able to have them later, but it's just there to have an anchor. So without further ado, I'm going to share my other screen. Just a moment. Okay. Okay, so you should be able to see right now the Royal Botanical Gardens of Melbourne. And I would like to start off, first of all, this is Google Earth, which has amazing features, which I hope that if you take anything from this tour, besides the content itself for Hanukkah, that you'll be inspired to explore this amazing tool. So an introduction question for our tour, for Culture Clash, to introduce the topic. This is an image of, this is Melbourne, right? What physical landmarks are there in Melbourne that are influenced in some way by classical Greece? So just think for a moment. We don't have to jump up. I just want you thinking about the question. I'm sure that you're going to get more than I do, because this is, I've never been to Australia yet. But just to think in these terms, how many buildings, landmarks, institutions have some sort of association with the contribution of classical Greece or Hellenism, which we'll explore, onto Western culture? How many buildings can you think of? So I hope I get all of them. I probably won't, but I'm going to get some of them. And I'd like to focus on a few of them from up on air and then to zoom in to one of them. So the first one, well, obviously we can't think about sports, Olympics, without thinking about ancient Greece. So we have the cricket ground, although I don't really know if that would qualify for the Olympics back in the day. as a sport, but we have the idea of sports, Olympics, entertainment. So that's something to think about. The next one, well, Greeks brought us a form of government, which is called democracy, right? And so we think about government. Well, their democracy, I would say, is very crude. It was men only, and only if you were a freeman who owned an estate. But it's the beginning of a different form of a government by the people. So we have the government house here, which was, I mean, I think it was used for a short period of time while there was a transition in where the government was. But in any event, a government house, that is a representation of a concept, of a representation of the people, which was introduced by ancient Greece. Of course, there is also the shrine for the fallen in World War I originally, but then eventually for all fallen Australian soldiers in wars. And the Shrine of Remembrance, I just want to zoom into that for a moment. Here we are, look at that. Now we're going to use on the bottom right this little yellow character who's going to show us where you can walk and move in 3 dimensions, or just stand and look around 360. Those are those dots. And I'd like to take you right in front of the shrine. Now this shrine, we're going to look at this architectural structure, which is basically a colonnade with a pediment, or a pedimented colonnade, whatever the architectural term is, however you attack it, with these typical Doric capitals. There's Doric, Ionian, Corinthian. That's fun stuff we learn in architecture. And this is, first of all, this Hellenistic or classical Greek architecture, we're going to find it everywhere. So the big museums in the world use it. Major public museums use it. It's the typical classical Greek architecture for monuments, shrines, and public buildings. So this is a very important thing to notice, is just in terms of the architecture, the classical Greece or Hellenistic culture has had a tremendously strong impact on the architecture of the West. Right? In addition to that, this particular building is designed based on an actual monument in Halicarnassus, which holds the mausoleum in Halicarnassus, by the way, speaking of shrines and monuments, is one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. It's in modern day Turkey. And this is based on the tomb of Mausolus, something like that, in Halicarnassus in Turkey. And that's what it was designed to look like. So we have a direct reference from the classical Greek world, which we're going to call the Hellenistic period, on Western culture here in Melbourne, Australia. So that's a really cool thing to see. And you can also move around, walk around a little bit. That's some of the fun things you can do. I hope you're not getting dizzy, but you can really travel along and move along and see all kinds of fun things. This was captured in October of 2016. You can see that on the bottom right as well. So you can see when the pictures have been captured, if there have been changes that have been made. So that's one. Now hold on tight, I'm zooming out. So that was one. We also have it's a different part of town. We have Monash University, but the concept of a university is very much an introduction, an academy, a library, a center for scholarly study and debate. That is something which was introduced to the world by the Greeks, by the classical Greeks, right? And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. And of course, museums. And I will get to the Hellenic Museum in Melbourne a little bit later. I was a bit let down by the fact that I can't walk around in the museum like I can here. Some museums you can, some museums you can't, but I hopefully will at least reference the museum and show you what you can see in it on Google Earth later. But you can, of course, actually go to the museum. So you have that advantage. So that was just our introduction. Now, I'm using that as an introduction because the topic of this virtual tour and this presentation is called a cultural clash, or as I used to call it, Chanuka, Hellenism, and the Jews. And the idea of a culture clash is that for the first time in Jewish history, Jews are not under threat of extermination or war or being conquered by another invading country, by another invading civilization for, let's say, tax purposes, or because you didn't rebel, or because we don't like you. Right? That's not exactly what happened. Alexander the Great arrives in Israel after conquering the Persian Empire. He's received in a very positive way by the leadership of the Jewish people, the Jirosua, the Sanhedrin, the Anshe Knesset Gdolah, the men of the Great Assembly. And it's an okay relationship for most of the time. And what the Hellenistic culture, what Alexander the Great brings with him, is culture, is enlightenment, And that's really the impact of Hellenism on the West. It's what Hellenism basically is it's a set of philosophical ideas and beliefs which come together, including architecture and all kinds of other things, which are what we call classical Greece or Hellenism. So that's what we're referring to in the broadest sense of Hellenism is the architecture, which comes from temples and shrines and public buildings and amphitheaters and stadiums. We're talking about art. We're talking about the literature, Greek tragedy, Greek comedy, right? We're going to get into that a little bit more. There's the idea of philosophy itself, the love of wisdom, right? And then there's higher education. All of these ideas so far are very much in line with things that Jews believe in, right? And so you can imagine that when a culture comes in with these ideas, it can even be seen as a threat or a challenge to, hey, we are a culture which was always caring about wisdom and Torah and learning and enlightenment and beauty. And now we have a rival culture who seems to be doing a lot better than us in the very same things that we are supposedly seeing ourselves as a light unto the nations. And then we have another competing light unto the nations coming in almost threatening our lifestyle. So we'd like to explore that idea a little bit more. And that's why I'm calling it a cultural clash, even though there were battles along the way which were physical, but the main idea, those were basically dragged into the party. It's really a cultural clash. We also have the idea of democracy, as we mentioned, and sports and competition. So all of those things are part of classical Greece's contribution to what became Western society, and which basically conquered the world and created this concept we call the West. Right? That's really what it is. So that's the framing it. So before we move on to our first museum, I would like to refer you to our sources and to page 1. Now I'm going to paraphrase it if you don't have it. I call it a clash foreshadowed. And here I'm using some midrashic ideas, these exegetical ideas, which take the verses from Zechariah. And Zechariah, one of the later prophets who was at the beginning of the Second Temple, actually prophesied an upcoming cultural clash. And he says it as follows. He says, "Ve'orarti banaich Tzion al banaich Yavan." I will arouse your children, O Zion, against your children, O Yavan. And we see that Yavan is the forefather of Greek culture. The Yavan, the person, was the grandson of Noach. And the famous story where we have Noach coming out of the ark, and he has his 3 children, Shem, Ham, and Yefet, to whom he gives very unique blessings and curses. And yet we are all descendants of Shem. That's where the concept Semitic comes from. We are Semite. We come from Shem. And then there is Yefet. There is Yefet, who is the father of Yavan. Yefet, also the word Yefet comes from Yafeh. It means nice, it's beautiful. The philosophical root, the conceptual root of the connection between Yavan and the children of Shem, us, culturally, is in the earliest expressions of this nation of the blessing that they're given. And so while we have a cultural clash that's being foreshadowed by Zechariah, and I showed some nice verses that show you how Tzion is the word Yavan plus the letter Tzadik, which you can say has to do with a certain aspect of righteousness. Tzadik, there's some nice Kabbalistic and Midrashic philosophical ideas. We don't have the time to delve into them, but there's something beautiful there to see that the Yavan and Tzion and Zion are very much related. But the second one where I spoke about common roots, the second source on page 1, is that blessing. The blessing which Noach gives to his son Yefet, who again is the father of Yavan, is Yaft Elokim leYefet veYishkon beOhalei Shem. God has given beauty to Yefet, and that beauty may dwell in the tents of Shem. Now, when you think about the idea of a tent means intimacy, right? It's the bedroom. And talking about the beauty of Yefet, that beauty may dwell in the tents of Shem. That is telling you that the beauty, which we're saying is the highest expression of Greek culture, of Yefet, the yofi of Yefet, the beauty of Yefet, which Chazal say, the rabbis say, that is referring to their language, and there are halachic implications to this, as I'll explain in a moment. The language is the highest expression of the Greek language. Now, we know this not only from watching My Big Fat Greek Wedding, in which give me any word in English and I'll show you how it's Greek. The Greeks were very, very proud of their language, and they are until today. The ancient Greeks had a term for people who did not speak Greek, and that was barbaroi, barbarians, those people who don't even speak properly. So speaking Greek is a very, very important aspect of what Greece brings to the world. The Hellenistic culture is conveyed through the medium of their language. So that's very, very important. And what Chazal, the rabbis, are saying here is that this verse is foreshadowing the relationship between us and this culture once they reach that level of expression and they're bringing it to the world. Yaft Elohim leyefet ve'ishkon be'olei Shem means the beauty of Yefet will dwell in the most intimate place of Shem, which comes to teach us halachically that with all of the intricate details and strictures of how to write a Sefer Torah, which has very strict scribal rules in order to make sure it's copied properly, you can write the whole thing in Greek and it's kosher. What an amazing idea that the holiest thing for Jews can be written entirely in Greek, because that's the most intimate thing. That's the tent of Shem, which comes to teach us that there is a deep connection between the highest expression of Greece and what is holiest to us. So we shouldn't say, oh, this is all just Greek culture and you just throw it out the window. There's something very important which we need to learn how to deal with. And through this cultural clash, we learn what elements of it do we assimilate in a good way and what do we want to keep out. And that's the first time we actually had to deal with that, was through Chanuka. So that was our introduction. Now I'd like to take you from here. Hope you don't get too dizzy. I'm taking you to a place where your dear Rabbi Sender comes from. You're from Massachusetts, right? This is the Boston MFA, the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. So I don't know, it's an hour drive away from Sharon, something like that, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
No, we're not going to talk about parking in Brookline.
With traffic.
With traffic. Yeah, parking in Brookline is a nightmare. I mean, actually in Boston or Cambridge, just cross the street to Brookline and park and catch an Uber. So I love the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. It's one of my favorite museums in the United States. And I've been there several times. I've guided there. Now, the Boston MFA, I'm taking you outdoors just so that we can, first of all, make that connection to the architecture of Hellenistic culture of classical Greece. So that's the first thing you notice. This is a museum. It's a public building, and it has that gable pediment. It has the colonnades. It has the underpinnings of what we call Greek architecture. It's all there. Now we're going to go into the museum. Here's where it helps to know where you're going. So I'm just going to make it easier for you to see. I switched back to regular maps so that you can see what it looks like, right? It shows you what you're looking for. And now with this little figure, I'm going to be going, it doesn't list everything properly, but I'm going to go into ancient Greece. Okay. Oh, that was the coin room. I wanted to go here. Okay. So we're in a room, we're going to spend a little bit of time here. This is a room which has to do with daily life in ancient Greece, and there's a lot to see here. We're going to focus on several different aspects here. But the first thing I'd like to do is to talk about Greek amphorae. And amphora, of course, is this clay vase, this terracotta vase. I want to read you a book I'm reading right now, which is a collection of studies, which is called Looking at Greek Vases. And it's several different collections. It's a collection of different essays on the topic of Greek vases. I want to read you the introduction because it's beautiful. Greek vases are important, even in a culture such as our own, enslaved to the lords of cash and quick profit, and this is before smartphones. The importance of Greek vases can be measured in terms of the millions of dollars, pounds, and yen annually expended in their trade. The museums of the world, from London to Tasmania, Moscow to Osaka, are stocked with Greek vases. Men go to jail for the sake of Greek vases. Academic careers are constructed on expertise in Greek vases, and exceptional students of Greek vases may receive knighthoods. So Greek vases are important. As the paragraph begins, they convey to us the culture of Greece, many different stories. And when we finish several of these discussions, I'd like to focus on why Greek vases and what is the purpose of displaying all of these pictures on vases. That's something to put in the back of your mind as we explore. So let's begin with perhaps one of the most important aspects, and that's also on page 2 of our sources, and that is what's called the symposium. Now the symposium, let me just stand here. The symposium is where Greek culture happens. Greek culture in the sense of philosophical debate, academic discussion, storytelling, music, this is where it happens, in the symposium. So a few things about the symposium. The symposium is the precursor to a social gathering with wine, where you drink wine culturally in a sophisticated way. Cul- Cultures before the Greeks or different nations, when they would drink wine, say the Persians or the ancient Egyptians, drank wine and looked at wine as a symbol of royalty and power, right? The Assyrians and so on. But for the Greeks, it was culture. And they had this belief that Dionysus, who's at the top of the page, but he's the god of viticulture, the god of wine, taught humans how to drink wine. And drinking wine had a whole to do around it. So first of all, let's just take a look at the vessels. All of these vessels are samples of the various accoutrements of the symposium, the setting. There's the room, there's the lights, there's the food, there's the vessels, but sometimes they would just drink wine and not eat at all, but sometimes they would eat. In any event, these are all part of the setting of drinking wine. Now, they're all very, very decorated. Some of them are decorated with symposium images, like in this one, you can see, looking up close, at the center of this red figure, that's what it's called because it's red figures. This red figure, terracotta calyx, it shows you two men sitting, about taking their shoes off, reclining. One of them is playing a flute. One of them is sort of, I guess he's fixing his toga or something like that. And they're usually in the nude, right? And it was usually only for men. Women who were there were usually for entertainment of various different types. The room in which it happened may have been sometimes the most important room in the house. It was called the andron. For those of us who are more familiar with ancient Greek, that means the men's room, in which it was only men. There actually were set aside rooms for women, which were called women's rooms. So, but the men's rooms were usually only for men. This was a very men-oriented society, as we know, but we're going to talk about their import to society. And what they did is that they drank wine. Now, there was a whole wisdom to how to mix your wine with water, because winemaking, there's another exhibition about winemaking at the other end here, but not going to get into that. The wine in ancient Greece was very concentrated, very sugary, very strong, and very high in alcohol. And so the Greeks believed that only the gods are able to drink unmixed wine. People who drink unmixed wine, humans who drink unmixed wine, are uncivilized. You can't control your liquor, right? Alexander the Great and his father Philip actually drank unmixed wine, and that didn't give them a good reputation amongst the Greeks. That's another story. So remember, they're Macedonian, they're not Greek, and that's a whole lovely story where they appropriated the Greek culture and said, we're bringing this to the world, but the Greeks were like, hey, you're not one of us. So it's interesting to hear a Greek jump into your Torah when you talk about Alexander the Great, and they say, like, he was actually Greek. Like, there's a lot of luggage there. But anyway, so let's take a look. So this is the vessels that they used. Now, what exactly is happening in the symposium? There's actually a piece of work called the Symposium, written by Plato, but that was about his teacher who was Socrates, who had all these debates in the Symposium. So Greek philosophy, Greek culture, that's where it's happening, in these rooms. There's a very special setting for what they did, and there's various degrees of importance and sophistication that have to do with how you mix your wine, how much you drink, and what you do when you drink, how you hold your liquor. So these are the proverbial wine snobs, the Greeks, and they would judge you by how you drink your wine. And they wrote about it. There's poetry about it. There's all kinds of writings about drinking wine. Now that's a very important detail, because when we think about wine and Judaism, right, think about where we drink wine and how we use wine, right? We use wine for sacrament. We use wine for telling the difference between Shabbat and the rest of the week, whether it's going into Shabbat with Kiddush or leaving Shabbat with Havdalah. Wine is something which is used for discernment and telling the difference, unless you're in Purim and then you're drinking wine to get drunk because you want to sort of relax and loosen up. So you have these two aspects of wine. Now, some of the sources which I chose, I had to pick a few, but there's a lot to pick from. Homer's beautiful quote, which no poem was ever written by a drinker of water, because you need to drink wine if you want to get creative and lucid, and that's very important. Then we have Aristophanes, who says wine reveals that which is hidden, and that is very similar to the Talmud in Sanhedrin, which says Nichnas yain yatsa sod. Secrets come out when you drink wine. So we see that wine has a very special treatment. A very nice idea about drinking wine, the image that I have on the page from the amphora shows men laying down, reclining. You can think about drinking wine on Pesach at the Seder. Let me just heighten here. This is an example. So reclining to your left. Now, all of this discussion about drinking wine, how you're supposed to drink wine like free men and women at the Pesach Seder and Passover night, is very much patterned along the symposium, where there's a small table in front of you. And when we learn the Mishnah of how to perform the Seder and how to get the kids to ask, hey, what's going on? Ma nishtana, to get them to ask questions, one of the things that the Mishnah says is, well, you just remove the table. And you think about how we sit in front of a table that's not exactly doable. But when you think about the symposium, oh, you just have this, you just move the table. Like, there's the small table, move the food. Hey, where's the food going? What's going on? Isn't this a regular dinner? Aha. Well, boys and girls, tonight, 3,000 years ago, things weren't quite the same either. We left Egypt. It's a trick to get the kids curious and interested. But that's very much patterned along the symposium, drinking wine, reading stories, telling the stories. That's a very important aspect. Now, there's another aspect here, which I'm going to say in the kid-friendly version, we don't talk about this stuff, and I'm not going to zoom into these pictures because they're very graphic, but they talk about eros in the symposium and how the symposium has to do with the erotic aspect and more promiscuous things that were going on there. And so when you think about a cultural clash, think first of all, here we have a culture who has a sophisticated relationship with wine, right? Which wine has to do with wisdom, with discernment, and also with relaxing and fun, right? It's all of that, but it also goes to places where we don't want wine to go. So you can imagine that the Greeks coming into Israel and starting to build these Greek homes and build the Greek architecture, and they built stadiums, as we know, and all kinds of other things to bring their culture with them. We don't want that. So you can imagine this being a little bit threatening just in terms of sexuality. That's like, we don't want that relationship to sex. We want things to be more pure, more and so on. And they're mixing the two in a way that we're uncomfortable with, to say the least. But that's just showing us a little aspect of Greek culture. Okay, now we're going to move from here to another aspect of Greek culture, and that is, you know what, moving from wine. I think this is a great way to go. Don't get dizzy. We're moving a little bit fast. There we are. We're going to talk about comedy right here. Comedy is another aspect of Greek literature. This is standard high school textbook stuff, but we learn about comedy and theater in ancient Greece, entertainment through words and play, which they elevated to the level of an art form. They had players, actors, stadiums, theaters, and a lot of this stuff was done in a religious context. It was done to replay stories of their mythology and give them sort of continue the impact of the gods and goddesses through reenacting things, which is why theater and ritual are so connected to each other. But if we just isolate it, we're talking about something which has a very profound impact on Western culture. I mean, we all like a night out with stand-up comedy, right? We love something funny. We love a show. This is something which the Greeks brought to the world. And of course, it's decorated on all of the household earthenware that they used to eat with and drink with. Now, another aspect of Western culture, which is very important to us, is the concept of Greek tragedy, which has a lot to do with understanding life and life's tragedies. We have very, very important stories like Orpheus playing the instrument and then bringing his beloved back from the death, but he looks back and then she goes away. It's like we're dealing with life's tragic elements and telling it through story and representing it in all these vessels, which are all over the house. So this is a very important story to them. So we have all the very famous Greek writers. We have Sophocles, Aeschylus, Euripides, Eumenides, all these people. They're very, very famous, but they've made their impact on Western culture by telling Greek tragedy, which is sort of like foreshadowing, you can say even the Grimm brothers, but we're talking about stories and lore and folk tales, right? So this is a very important aspect of Greek culture. Just to give you a few more examples, here's Aeschylus. I have some difficulty pronouncing his name in English. And Euripides, all these different stories, right? So it's an amazing idea to have a culture that grows up on telling these sorts of stories and representing them everywhere. This is a fascinating new idea, which is coming into the East. Now, I'm going to take you to another one, and I don't want you to get dizzy. So if you're going to get dizzy, if I move fast, you might want to just shut your eyes for a few seconds. Okay. Let's go to one of the first Greek historians, Homer. Second. Here we go. Homer, we know he was a blind man. Homer gave us two very important writings, right? We all know, have heard their names. We have the Odyssey and the Iliad. So what Homer does is he wasn't really an historian, like we say Herodotus is really the father of modern history, who really told stories and embellished them. But what Homer did is he recorded stories that were known, and he had a way of writing them which became very well known. They were famous. So even the Talmud talks about Homer, Homeros, and so on, right? He was a very known figure. So Homer and the epic tradition, the concept of maintaining ideas of epic tradition of stories, right? Okay. So one of the famous stories is, of course, the Trojan War, which in recent archaeology has been discovered to have actually happened. They embellished it with all the gods and goddesses being involved and all of that, but it's an actual war that happened. We used to think it's a myth, right? And Troy is in the southwestern coast of Turkey. So we have what's fascinating about this display, this exhibition at the Boston MFA, is that through household vessels and tools and decoration, here's a mirror, cosmetic boxes, bowls, calyxes, amphorae for drinking wine and mixing, all of that, you can go through the entire story of the Battle of Troy. We have the fall of Troy, we have Achilles and Hector, right? We have the arms of Achilles, and finally we have the judgment of Paris. So all of these aspects which we read about in school of the Battle of Troy are part of the story, as it's just around the house. It's everywhere, right? And we're going to focus on that idea very, very soon. I just wanted to focus on one more, if I can manage to get there without going through the wall. Don't worry about it. And that is the Odyssey. It's also in here. This is just the Roman world. So we have, there we go. We have the Odyssey. There's just another display here which has to do with the Odyssey. We just walked through it. Isn't that cool? Okay, but that's good enough. We're good. By the way, something really, really fun to notice. This is a calyx, which is, again, a bowl for drinking and drinking wine. You're laying down, so you can't hold your cup. You're drinking from a flatter dish. And when you're looking at it, you see these two eyes that are looking at you. Now, we're looking at it at a very clandestine environment, right? Because it's very well lighted in the museum. But this image below shows you, these are called eye cups, but you see them a lot on different vessels. You're in a dark room with flickering lights, and everything is moving and jumping. There's movement that is brought to these vessels and to their decorations. You can tell a story, you can imagine it sort of actually happening when you're imbibed just enough, and those eyes are looking at you, and it's entertaining, it's fun, right? They bring an aspect of entertainment to wine drinking. So this is also something really cool to notice. So let's just sum up this part of the conversation before we move on to the next museum and next continent. Why are these pictures and stories all displayed on household vessels and dishes and everything, right? Something to think about. Let me just see if there's anything in the chat. Is there? No, it looks like we're good. Okay. So think about it like, in the very least, a conversation starter, right? Imagine you're sitting around the hearth with your kids on a Friday night, and they're coming back from, you're having a Shabbat Friday night meal, and you're having a conversation, and you bring up, I would say the Shabbat table, not the hearth. That makes more sense. You're sitting around the Shabbat table, and you ask the kids, so what did you learn in school? What's the weekly parasha? And you're having a conversation with them, right? Now let's take that to ancient Greece. You're sitting around, I just said the hearth for ancient Greece, but you're sitting there with one of these vessels, which I guess you would put in the living room or something, around the dinner table, I guess. They didn't have dinner tables. They sat around on beds with the food on small tables, but you're sitting around as a family, and you quiz your kids. So what exactly is that story there? What's the mythological character? Which of Achilles' 10 trials is this, right? And the kid answers, right? And okay, Asclepius, here you get a candy, right? So you have this conversation starter because you have a visual prompter to a story. So think about this in terms of comic books, in terms of movies. What is the role of those things in society, right? There are certain values that Western culture is bringing through the visual entertainment, through visual anchors, right? That's why we have all of these things. Now, before movies, before comic books, before posters, before television, you have your home, and you decorate your home with the things which prompt us to think about the stories which matter to us. And this is where I'm going to refer you. This is page 3, really briefly, to Greek mythology and how important Greek mythology was to Greek culture. So obviously there's a lot of things there which us as Jews would say this is an aspect of Hellenism which we're going to reject because we believe in one God. But it's not only that, it's the values, the import of the stories themselves. So that's why I presented just a few. We have Zeus and Athena, Dionysus and Heracles, or as the Romans called him, Hercules. The reason these are important to us is because they, one second. Yeah, very important. I want to mention exactly the idea of mythology is that the Greeks, what they thought of these characters is this is our stories, this is our heritage, this is our history, this is how we came about, this is who we are. So for example, the stories of Heracles, he's the savior of humankind, he's the hero. He's the person you look up to. Look at the challenges he's been to, the human failures that he's had. Or you look at Zeus. Now Zeus, the kid version of Zeus and Heracles in Walt Disney is not really the right one. We all know that Zeus was pretty busy, you can say, in ways that really upset his wife Hera, right? Not to mention that there's just all these children who are born from interactions with humans, not only with gods. So we have demigods, like Heracles is a demigod, right? And Hera actually tries to kill him, and he kills his daughters and his wife when he's angry with her. There's like all these messed up stories of family feuds going on. So the Greeks looked at these as their role models, but think about the values that they're bringing with them. These values which you can say legitimize promiscuity, which legitimize all of these human failures which are attributed to the gods. What the Greeks did with their mythology, which what we're calling mythology, is they brought the gods down to earth, right? They made them human. Unlike in the ancient Near East, where we have ancient Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, their gods are up there and humans are down here, and we have to appease them and please them and serve them, but the gods are up there. They're perfect. And whatever they have between them, they're gods. They don't connect to us humans, even though they have all of their stories between them. The Greeks brought the gods down to earth. And you can say that's a little too close for comfort, right, metaphorically speaking, but that's one of the things that they did, is that they changed how we relate to the divine, which was uniquely Greek. The Romans, who adopted their mythology with slight changes, didn't have that aspect. They had the gods up there. They didn't have them meddling with humans in the same level as the Greeks did, right? So this is something which is uniquely Greek, and you can see was somewhat of a threat. Now, this is something, the Alexander the Great part, I really need to be in the museum to show you the coins of Alexander the Great, which have Heracles on them. But the point is that Alexander the Great saw himself as a Hercules, and he used coins to convey that message, because money gets everywhere, right? Everybody sees money. So he wanted people to associate him with that mythological creature, or their, so to speak, historic figure who is the savior of humankind, right? So that was his coins. Okay, that being said, we're going to move on to our next story, which has to do with first of all, with warfare. I'm going to save the big surprises for the end. Okay, hang on. Okay, so warfare. The first thing I'm going to say about warfare is I was hoping to take you into the Hellenic Museum of Melbourne. And this is a picture of what I'm able to see inside it, which is not a lot. I think my screen, what happened? Ran out of control. Sorry. I don't know what happened over there. So there was not really much to see there, just 360 and so on, but there was an exhibition in the Hellenic Museum which has to do with warfare in ancient Greece. And I wanted to focus on that because we're going to be talking about a very important battle which has to do with Chanuka and some of the uniqueness that the Israel Museum has to contribute to that story. And for that, we are on page 4, which I called The Art of War, even though this has nothing to do with Lao Tzu, but rather Mao's Tzu, The Art of War. So I'm going to talk about that, but look at this battle formation on page 4, which is the Macedonian phalanx, where you have a certain formation of soldiers in rows and lines with, excuse me, with large spears and shields in front of you, and these formations which are formidable and which really were able to conquer the West and eventually conquer large parts of the East. Is my screen not shared? Somebody's asked me to share my screen.
Yeah, it's shared, but if I don't know if you can share the sources. Is that possible, or you have it printed
No,
out?
I cannot. I can only share one screen, which is why I specifically said if I'm going to try to paraphrase
Gotcha.
what I'm talking about. I'm not. I have no sources on my screen. I have them in front of me because I have them prepared.
Cool.
You can get them later. I'm going to describe what you see. All you see is a phalanx formation, Macedonian phalanx formation. I really can't share that. But what I will show you is the armor, right? So think of this armor, standardized armor of various types. Let's see if there's any more images, right? Here's a nice example. Greek armor was formidable, right? Unlike, you read Herodotus, the Persian Wars, Herodotus describes what a menagerie the Greek army was, where they had soldiers from across the Persian Empire wearing everything from feathers on their heads to their bodies painted in 2 different colors from top to bottom, from halfway up and the torso down. I mean, incredible. A lot of that's just for show, right? But the Greeks had standardized military bronze armor, which had to do with what region you're from and so on. And when they're marching in unison, they're unstoppable, they're undefeatable, right? So I want you to have this in mind when we're thinking about what exactly is that we are up against when the Hasmoneans end up rebelling. So I'm going to take you now into the Israel Museum. I hope you can all see these two stelas, these 2 erect stones. So these 2 stones, I'm taking you into the Israel Museum. The reason I'm in the Israel Museum is because when you want to talk about a culture clash and you want to talk about the impact of Alexander the Great and his successors, the Ptolemaic dynasty and the Seleucid Syrian Greeks on the region, in the Israel Museum, it shows you material culture that was unearthed by and of things that were made by those very cultures in Israel. So it's very important to recognize that. Now, what I'm going to show you here, just one of them, is this stela with a rosette on top, is called the Heliodorus inscription. Why? Because it's talking about a particular governor or high priest of the Greeks whose name is Heliodorus. Now, this inscription has a royal decree in ancient Greece. It was found around the area of Beit Guvrin. Oh, look at that. Ha, it's a little beautiful. Wow. So I'm going to tell you basically about it. This is dated to, it's referring to a particular administrative decree, which is preceding Antiochus IV Epiphanes. This was when his brother, who was short-lived as an emperor, Seleucus IV, was emperor. Here, Seleucus IV. He is the son of Antiochus III the Great, who was good to us, who conquered Judea from the hands of their rivals in the south, the Ptolemaic Greek dynasty, and he lost to Rome. There was a whole story, and Seleucus's brother Antiochus IV Epiphanes, who is our villain, was captive in Rome, which is how you keep your controlled governor under control, or however it is, your vassal. And so Rome at the time was starting to gain power there in their ascendancy, and in order to maintain control of the Seleucid Syrian Greeks and make sure that they don't expand too much, they kept the son of the ruler of the emperor Antiochus the Great III in Rome as hostage. He's going to an Ivy League college there. He's learning the culture. He's doing the whole thing. But he was able to escape, and he managed to instigate his brother's death, which was very convenient. So this is the ruler right before Antiochus IV Epiphanes, who led to the decrees of Chanuka. Now, the reason this is important to us is because it's showing us a direct example of what a Greek decree would look like. If you want to know what Antiochus's decrees looked like, it looked something like this. You would have a stela with Greek, which tells you these are the decrees of the king put in some sort of public place and enforced by law. This is an actual Greek decree, right, which has to do with the administration of the Greeks in Judea. Now, right next to it, and this is 9 years ago, so the display looks a little bit different, but these coins are the first ever Jewish coins in the world, right? These are the first coins ever found of Jewish kings, of the Hasmonean kings. You have a display of the whole dynasty here from Matityahu and his 5 children to the first king Simeon, Shimon, and their predecessors John Hyrcanus, Yochanan, Kohen Gadol, all the way to Matityahu Antigonus II, who's the last Hasmonean king. And these are all coins, which unfortunately we can't really see up close on this resolution, but you can look on their website and look at their coins. But the Hasmonean coins are also the model used for modern Israeli coins. All of the modern Israeli coins are patterned on Jewish coins, either from the Hasmonean period, or from the Great Revolt against the Romans, or from the Bar Kokhba Revolt, with one exception, right? That's what the coins are. So these are the first Jewish coins, and they represent Jewish independence, because we now control the economy, our local economy, and so we have our own coins. An emperor in the Roman world, the year the emperor ascends the throne, they mint new coins. I am king, these are my coins, you use my money. So we talk about Chanuka Geld, there's a connection that goes way back, you can talk about this. So that's nice. Now what I would like to do from here is to take you to the most critical battle in the story of Chanuka. I'm taking you now to the Battle of Beit Tzol. So here's the background, really, really briefly giving you the background, okay? The Greeks, after Alexander the Great dies, his generals fight between them for about 20 years. They're called diadochoi, and his diadochoi end up carving up the massive empire between them, with the 2 most powerful diadochoi, Ptolemaeus and Seleucus, controlling the largest portion of land, which is Egypt and Syria. So in the south we have Ptolemy who controls Egypt, and he builds the lighthouse of Alexandria, which is one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. He builds a library which is about bringing wisdom, the Greek culture, to the world. It was unfortunately destroyed in a fire, but it was legendary. Having a library, think of like this is the first library of its sort. Unlike the Assyrian library of Ashurbanipal, which is another story, this is one which scholars from across the world come to visit, and every ship that would come to the port of Alexandria would have to display all of their books, bring them into the library, have their scribes copy them, and then you can take your books back. They were really, really methodical about collecting wisdom, and that of course included collecting the wisdom of the Jews, which is where the concept of the Septuagint, the translation of the Torah into Greek, originated from. It's from Ptolemy the first and the second, who said, we want all the wisdom collected and gathered here in Alexandria. This is where it's at, which is, by the way, where I put the lighthouse on the top of on the first page. I forgot to mention that. Okay, so the Seleucids are in control of the area called Syria, the district in Syria. So we call them the Seleucid Syrian Greeks. And after about 180 years in which the Ptolemaic dynasty of Alexandria of Egypt were able to maintain control over Judea, which is really the bridge between the continents. It's a very important landmass. The Seleucids were able to take advantage of weakness, and Antiochus the Great, the father of Antiochus Epiphanes of Chanuka, took control of the region, okay? Now, there were particular decrees which increased the pressure on Jews: no circumcision, no Shabbat, no Rosh Chodesh, but also a lot of persecution. And there's a lot of Hellenized Jews who are siding with the Greeks and going against the more traditional Jews. Like, there's a lot of fighting going on, a lot of tension, and it's all brought to a boil with Antiochus the Great Epiphanes, who really says no longer Mr. Nice Guy. It's no longer, I'm going to show you what Hellenistic culture is and let you pick. I'm going to force you. So we know there's a story that happens in Modi'in, and if you look here at this map, you'll see right outside of the darker landmass on the top left, right here is a triangle with a red triangle with a blue circle inside it, which shows you the blue is a Jewish city and the triangle is where there was a battle. This right here to the south, to the northwest of Jerusalem, near the modern city of Modi'in. We don't know exactly where it was, but it's in that area by the Arba 443 that goes to the airport, right, to Lod. So this is where the family of Matityahu fight against the local station soldiers. They probably had more luck than strategy. The soldiers must have been a little bit overweight on guard duty. You can say, like, with their guard down. They were not expecting a bunch of riffraff with kitchen knives to manage to actually take control of them. So it's sort of after you were able to kill the local the locally stationed soldiers, you go, okay, now what? They're coming for us. And so you have to haphazardly prepare for war. What Yehuda the Maccabee, Maccabee means hammer, by the way. Yehuda the Maccabee, the son of Matityahu, is able to display leadership and begin what's called guerrilla warfare. And the first 3 battles against the Seleucid Syrian Greeks, who are locally stationed a little bit up north, where you have, it says in Hebrew, Neapolis, and then on top of it, the top city, which says Samaria, Shomron, with green around it, that's where the soldiers are dispatched from. They're not coming in ships from the coast of Greece. They're simply marching south, right? So there are 3 very important battles that happen all in these mountains. And what the Jews were able to, under Judah the Maccabee, were able to demonstrate is that they have the advantage of knowing the terrain, and they're able to break up these formidable, powerful, unstoppable Greek battle formations by making them break formation and walk in single file through the mountains, and then using battle tactics of guerrilla warfare by picking at somebody and running, throwing a rock at them, making them turn around and fall like dominoes, and spewing chaos in the middle of the night, right? Basically demoralizing them and taking them out of their element. So they showed they have the advantage of the terrain. So the first 3 battles are the battles of the Samaria Mountains, the battles of Ma'ale Bet Horon and Emmaus, all battles in this area north of Jerusalem, near them in the mountains. The third battle is where the Greeks understand, okay, this is not working for us. We need the advantage of the terrain. We need the advantage of our battle formations. Otherwise, the battle is on their terms. So I'm going to direct you to the southern area of this darker highlighted portion of land, and that is the Battle of Beit Tzol. So you can see on the very bottom, there's numbers on this map. I'm showing you right now where it says number 2. That's Beit Tzol. Number 7 is Jerusalem, and Chakra is a fortress which is recently identified, but until very recently, we're saying less than 15 years, nobody knew where it was. There were just stories about it. A powerful fortress which controlled the temple in Jerusalem. Now, I'm not going into all the details, but what's important for us to understand here is the layout of this particular battle, which happened in Beit Tzol in the south. You can see on the left, you have Apollonia going down to Lod, to Geza, and then to Maresha, which is number 1. There's a red line. That's the Seleucid Syrian Greek army. This is an army led by the commander Lysias with the Greek forces of 60,000 infantry and 5,000 cavalry, with the Jewish forces of 10,000 people. And they're supposedly trying to fortify themselves in a southern Judean hills city called Beit Tzol, inside a fortified wall. It's been excavated, it's been found. We found remnants of the battle, as well as the sling stones and arrowheads and so on, right? So instead of having 1,000 and 1,500 soldiers walking through the mountains and getting picked off by these riffraff, the Greeks said, okay, this time we're having a capable commander, Lysias, the Greek regent. He's very high ranking, and we're going to go slowly through the coast, which is, first of all, you have your battle formation, and it's more Hellenistic friendly. It's more pagan, or it's Hellenistic, as opposed to the mainland, which is a little bit more full of Jewish cities. You can see all these blue circles are Jewish cities, right? Whereas the black with red rimmed cities are pagan cities. So they have the support of the area, and they're walking from the south, and they're marching up north towards Jerusalem. And their first stop is Beit Tzol, and that's where these rebels, 10,000 men, poorly equipped, with some maybe misfitted armor and weapons that they were able to collect from the marauding of the previous 3 battles, right? Okay. Now what happens here is that the Greeks are setting up pickets, setting up for siege tactics. They already know that the Jews do not stand a chance. 60,000 soldiers, 5,000 cavalry against 10,000 Jews barricaded. This is going to be an easy one. We're going to go home and drinks on me, says Lysias, right? This is going to be easy. But Judah the Maccabee was waiting for them outside the city, where they did not know that. They thought they were inside the city, and they just crashed through the Greeks, the Seleucid Greeks, some of them even naked, just running so you can just run without being weighed down by weapons, by armor. And they just completely destroyed the Greek formation, sent them home, whoever was even left and whoever survived. And so this battle is a key battle for the following reason. After the Battle of Beit Tzol, Judah the Maccabee has proven to the Greek administration, empire, the Seleucid Syrian Greek Empire, that they are capable of fighting with the Greeks on the Greeks' terms. He is a capable military commander and strategist, and he's not to be toyed with. Point number two, after this high level of high-ranking commander who was devastated and killed, and this level of defeat of so many soldiers, you don't just come and fight again. You need a year to regroup, to bring in the soldiers and reallocate your forces from the empire, from the various things that they're busy in, right? Which is also enforcing taxes in the east. There's a lot going on. And we are going to come organized and we're going to fight them again. Now, the next battle, battle number 5, is Beit Zechariah. That's where you have elephants, and that's where we have a lot more damage happening. That's where Eleazar gets killed by the elephant, and things start going south. We're talking about 100,000 infantry and 20,000 horses. Same guy, Lysias, he wasn't killed. He comes back. Anyway, 32 war elephants. I mean, that's when they bring out the big guns. But this battle is the battle which turned the tides, in which they realized what they're dealing with. Now, because of that lull, that window of opportunity, which everybody knew was going to happen, after this defeat, you don't just fight another battle, right? It's under that circumstance that they went up, and that's where you see the blue dotted line, number 2, going up to 6 and 7, where after the battle of Beit Tzor, they went up to the temple, and under the watchful eye of the Chakra fortress, which could have destroyed them but didn't, another aspect of the miracle, they purified the temple, got rid of all the pagan gods that were put in there, and lit the lights of Chanuka. And that's when the miracle of Chanuka happened, after the battle of Beit Tzor. So I refer you to the sources where I just have, but I'm going to say it. It's the Song of Maoz Tzur. It's a 13th century piyut, which opens up with the words Tzor, Maoz Tzur Yeshuati, Maoz Tzur Yeshuati, our mighty stronghold, the Tzur, the rock of our salvations. A tour guide, a friend of my father from Beit El, Chaim Mageni of blessed memory, used to say that it's very likely that the writer of this poem was referring to the battle of Beit Tzor, because that's where the Yeshua, that's where the salvation really started happening, after the battle of Beit Tzor. So it's a beautiful connection between the battle, the story, which turned the tides in our favor, and we were able to go and repurify the temple and light the lights of Hanukkah, that's alluded to in the song Maoz Tzur Yeshuati. Beautiful. We're going to move on from here to our last and final part of this tour, and that has to do with sports. So let's get straight into it. This is the best part. We are now in Greece, we are in Athens, and we are looking at the Acropolis. And look how beautifully it's done in 3D. You have the whole thing. Temple of Athena, you have the Temple of Zeus, the whole thing, right? Beautiful. I'm just going to let you take a look here. Here's how you'd walk in with a procession. They had many different processions. This has been 3D scanned, which is how we're able to do this. Just giving it a few seconds to load. This structure, the Pantheon can actually withstand earthquakes. That's how well it was built. So this is it. This is Athens. This is the Acropolis. So this is where I'd like to end our tour. I will show you briefly, I'm switching screens really briefly to show you how all the interior of the Acropolis is in the British Museum. Right? We didn't have that much time to look at the British Museum, but they excavated and it's all here. So there's a lot to see. Right? It's built basically along the lines of the same architecture. It just shows you what was decorating the walls and the ceilings and the pediment. It's all here. It's really cool to see. So let's wrap up our conversation and talk about sports. So I'm referring you to our last page, page 5, Olympics, competition, and glory, right? What is that all about? The Olympics are a 4-year interval, sort of like we have a 7-year sabbatical method for counting time in Judaism. The Greeks had what are called Olympiads. The first one is mentioned in the Iliad, and it's talking about every 4 years. They had a performance of competition of everything from sports to poetry and making bread and all kinds of other things, in order to glorify the gods. And this is where I think the culture clash is at its deepest, subtlest, nuanced point between a Torah, traditional Jewish view, and the Greek view. Because all the other stuff you can say, okay, you know, promiscuity and idolatry, like those are big, like those are easy to say, we don't want that, right? And we can take the other things. But it's specifically the area of sports and competition in which it really, really comes out. And so just going to zoom out so you can see we have several different theaters. This amphitheater, I think, is the Dionysus Amphitheater. Here is this is a horse race track, right? We see the impact of this lifestyle. Oh, this is Dionysus right here on the terrain, right? This is a really major part of Greek culture, is bringing in theater and sports and Olympics and games, right? So there's where the games would be in a place like this, right? Here we go. Okay. Now, so let's talk about this idea. So I brought a beautiful idea from Homer, again from the Odyssey, who says, there is no greater glory for a man as long as he lives than that which he wins by his own hands and feet. I see there's a typo here, B, by his own hands and feet. So this sounds to us like an idea we really relate to. I mean, we want our kids to play sports. It's healthy, it's good, it's healthy competition, know how to lose like a sport, know how to win like a sport, respect your component. Like, these are all very, very nice ideas, which we very much relate to, right? There is something in there which is very healthy and good. And there is something in there which is so subtle and nuanced that we sometimes miss it. So let's take a look at two more quotes in order to get into that. And then we'll wrap this up. So Herodotus, in his Persian Wars, discusses, of course, this is historical myth. He didn't really hear the Persians speaking, but he says that a Persian soldier says to his commander, "Good heavens," explained a Persian soldier to his commander, "what kind of men are these against whom you have brought us to battle? Men who compete with each other for naught but glory?" The idea of competing for glory is a very uniquely Greek idea. The idea of being gifted with an with an amphora full of olive oil, which has to do with the gift of Athena to the people of Athens. I mean, there's a lot of nice ideas that you can tie into Hanukkah if we had more time, oil and wisdom and light, right? But they're very obviously connected symbolically, right? And the Olympics were a very, very big deal. In fact, it was such a pan-Hellenistic event that they would lay down arms, despite the fact that Greek polises were always fighting against each other. Greek cities were always fighting against each other. But every Olympiad, they lay down their arms, and you have a free pass. I have diplomatic immunity. I'm an athlete, right? I can go through a war zone. That's fine, because we're doing sports now, and we definitely have what to learn from that, right? But then we have Will Durant in the 1970s. He's an historian, an American historian who wrote a lot about ancient Greece. And he wrote, each of the 10 divisions of Attica was represented by 24 men chosen for their health, vigor, and good looks. And a prize was awarded to the most impressive for fine manhood. Now let's break that down. First of all, it was only men. Women had a very small Olympics, which they did for the goddess Hera. It was like a 100-meter dash. It wasn't anything serious. And women were actually not allowed into the Olympics, which were, by the way, all played in the nude. Now, people were awarded for good looks. So here's the obvious question. What if you weren't gifted with good looks? So you're not worth it? You don't have any value? I mean, think about how these negative aspects come out in Western culture today, where we celebrate the way people look on Vogue magazine, and then people think that they need to look like that. And then we become so critical of ourselves, thinking that we are inadequate because we need to look like that, right? So there's these little ideas that made their way in a negative way into the fabric of society. But then it says that as well as prizes were awarded for fine manhood. I mean, these aren't things I work for, but fine. But now let's talk about competition itself. What exactly is the idea of competition? The idea of competition, which Greeks introduced through the Olympics to the world, is first of all glorifying the gods by the perfect nature that they created. Look at how high this person can jump. Look how fast he can run. Look how beautiful their body is. And let us compete to figure out who's the best of the best of the best of what the gods have given us. But there's no room for change. You either have it or you don't, and you have to prove that you are the best of the best. What happens to the 99.999% who don't make it or can't even make it to the tryouts, right? So the idea of the glory of Greece from a Jewish perspective is actually one which diminishes our individual expression, which is the Jewish word for glory, which Chanuka is all about lehodotu lehalel. Hod is the Hebrew word for glory. That's what the Kohanim, who are the main players in Hanukkah, represent. The Kohanim are those who love every individual for their unique expression. And the light of the menorah, the light of Hanukkah, has to do with our success by standing up for something that matters to us, as opposed to actually winning a battle. I'll get to that moment in just I'll get to that idea in just a few moments. But my point is that the idea of competition has a dark side to it. And I use the word dark deliberately, because Hanukkah is about light and darkness. It's about being able to tell the difference between something which is so similar to us that you can get confused. And this is a subtle idea which is sometimes so hard to tell the difference, because it seems like we're celebrating the individual, but we're celebrating the individual at the expense of everybody else, and really saying that not everything is perfect, right? It's like some people make it and some don't, and those who make it, that's the good thing. On the other hand, let's look at the idea of Hanukkah. And one of the decrees which the Greeks had the biggest problem with has to do with this idea. And that is the idea of tampering with nature, tampering with creation, and suggesting, perhaps ever so slightly, that maybe the gods didn't get it right. And we have some role of intervening. Now come to Judaism, and we have the concept of Brit Milah, of circumcision. We're basically saying that the body is imperfect, and we need to make it better and nicer and beautiful. The Greeks said, who are you to do that? And yet the Torah says, this is how you become perfect. And the verse that I chose, the verse which is where Abraham is told about circumcision, is, Hitalech lefanai veheyeh tamim, walk before me and be wholesome. Notice these two distinct elements. One is to walk before God, not in hand with God, not behind God, to walk before, to scout the way, in the words of Star Trek, to go where no man has gone before, so to speak, to go and explore, to make mistakes, to make different changes. That is a very un-Greek idea, but that is the Jewish idea, the Torah idea of being partners in creation and changing the world for the better, because we have to figure it out, right? We have to make it better. It's insufficient. And finally, to be wholesome. How can you become wholesome? By diminishing from yourself, by saying nature is imperfect. But that's really how you do it, by saying that we have to complete creation. It's a partnership. It's not we have to just glorify the gods by celebrating what they gave us. It's we have to work with God to make this a better place. And that is a very subtle and important Jewish idea, which of course has made a tremendous impact on the world now. But that's an idea which really clashed with Greece at the time. And so I want to wrap this up with a beautiful midrash, which I'm really shortening, from the Tanchuma Tetzaveh, which is where the story of the menorah comes out, how to light the menorah. And it says, why would God need the menorah in the first place? I mean, think about it. We're in the tabernacle, in the desert, inside a tabernacle structure which is covered with all these leathers. It's dark inside there, but it's bright outside as day. I mean, it's the desert, it's the wilderness. And you're saying, I want you to light a little candle for me. I mean, what? Why do you need that? You have the stars and the quasars. You have the universe. Why would I need that? And God's response, I'm paraphrasing the Midrash, is, listen, this comes with a job. Yeah, galaxies are a dime a dozen. But you coming and saying, out of my devotion and dedication for this way of life and my partnership with God and creation, I'm expressing myself in this unique way. Well, that light means more to me than all the stars in the world. That's the light of Hanukkah. That's individual expression. That's the glory of Hanukkah, as opposed to the glory of Greece, which doesn't celebrate the individual, but rather only very few individuals who have those predetermined qualities which make them great, and everybody else doesn't make it. The idea of Hanukkah and the idea which the Kohanim celebrate is that there is a unique light to every individual, which they bring through the lighting of their candles. So that is the wrapping up the story of Hanukkah. So to wrap up what we've seen is we've seen how the Greek culture and the Jewish culture have many different similarities, but also differences. Some of them are more obvious than other, and the closer you get, the harder it is to tell the difference, but there is so much that we have in common. And so Hanukkah is a festival of light over darkness, where the darkness is not one in which you can't see what's in front of you, but rather that which confuses you as to where do I end and the other one begins, because we are so similar. And so we celebrate Western culture and we assimilate Western culture in a good way, because there is so much that it shares with us. And yet we have to be able to be discerning and to be able to tell the difference and what works and what doesn't work, and how we can maintain our individual expression and our contribution to the world. That was our tour. Thank you very much for joining us, and we will open up for questions, comments, and everything else.
So feel free to unmute yourself if you have any questions.
Mm-hmm.
also, what I'll do is I will send around the email, Nachliel's email address, if anybody does have any questions they wish to explore further. And I echo Naomi's sentiment to say it was fascinating, and we would much prefer to be in the Israel Museum with you for real. And hopefully we'll have that opportunity at some point. If you guys do make your way to Eretz Yisrael, and please God will be able to do so at some point soon, then look up Nachliel. You see at the bottom there, Museum Tours IL.
Or museumtours.co.il. The at Museum Tours IL is for those who are social media savvy. That's how you'll find me on all the social media platforms. The sources sent around have my information, and I'll just say that there's several exciting projects I'm working on you might be interested in. Some of them are not through my channels. Tanakh study, last year I did an entire year of podcasts once a week, connecting archaeology and the parasha. Podcast being an audio file you can listen to at your convenience. It's very easy to find. My website has all the links. And there's a new series called Sefer Study, where once a week we go through the archaeological and historic and geographic context in video of each book in Tanakh. It's very ambitious. I just published the 4th one yesterday, but that's also available, and you can link into it. And it's exciting, it's fun. You see virtual stuff, maps, archaeology, and so on. And then these tours, other than physically doing them, I do virtual tours. My YouTube channel, I slowly upload some of the older virtual tours that I've done. There's Ancient Egypt. There's the Four Kingdoms tour. Oh, that's on Facebook. I have to link it. There's a virtual tour of the Book of Yonah. There's all kinds of interesting things, exciting ideas. So I hope this was like an opening, perhaps for some of you, to a new world of what you can do with Google Earth and Street View. I hope you explore it more, because you can just drop the name of the museum in Google Maps, and then check if it's available on Street View by clicking that little yellow figure, and suddenly, hey, I can walk through the Metropolitan, the British Museum. I can walk through the Pergamon Museum in Berlin. I mean, there's so much you can do. It's so much fun. So anyway, that was that. I'm done.
Well, thank you so much, Nachliel, and so much hatzlach, and hopefully we can get to see you in Israel live as well very, very soon.
God willing. God willing.
And Chanukah Sameach. If we don't have an opportunity to speak to you until then, Chanukah Sameach, and may the light of Chanukah, the light of the Torah, illuminate this world and bring lots of healing and peace. So thank you so much, and thank you all for joining us this evening.
Regards from the Lopos across the street.
Ah, beautiful. Thank you so much.
We're neighbors. Yeah. Okay.
All the best. Take care. See you guys.
Bye-bye.